Welcome to A Night for Truth, conversations on the life and work of the great 20th century Catholic philosopher and theologian Dietrich von Hildebrand. I'm Tom Howard, and I'm speaking with Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, the wife of Dietrich von Hildebrand, speaking of his life and his work. His life has many of the characteristics of a thriller, actually, literal, fleeing hugger-mugger across borders from the Gestapo and so forth. I might mention that Dr. von Hildebrand's biography of her husband will be appearing in the year 2000 from Ignatius Press. So you will get
under the title, The Soul of a Lion.
The Soul of a Lion. So keep your eyes open for that book. It will be a combination thriller, work on the spiritual life, philosophical work, but I will tell you this much, it will be readable. It will be a page-turner, as they say. Well, we must press on with great dispatch here. We have about 50 hours of material to speak about in the next 27 minutes or so. So, Lily, let's jump right in. One of the great themes in your husband's work was this question of gratitude, which seems like a cliche, but...
do you remember, I believe it was a previous episode, that I questioned 4 priests whether they ever had a penitent who accused himself of lack of reverence.
And you actually asked.
Yes,
priest,
and all four, and one of them was very recently at EWTN, all 4 thought for a moment and said, no. And the sin of irreverence is a daily sin for most of us. The same thing can be said about gratitude. It seems to me that we live in a society which is cursed by the fact, I say cursed, that we never say thank you, we claim our rights. And this is going to have a profound effect on our social and familiar life. Now I'm going to tell here something very, very personal, which touches me so deeply that I hesitated to say so on television. But I thought that so many people could benefit from it that I'm going to tell you something about my husband's last days. He was in intensive care in a hospital in Westchester, and I was only permitted to visit him 3 times a day for a very short period of time. It was excruciating because he wanted me to stay and the nurse would just force me to leave. And of course I always was there way ahead of time. And when the time had come up, suddenly there's someone on the radio saying there's an emergency in intensive care, nobody can come up. And I knew in my heart, that was my husband. I knew that he was very close to death. I knew that his heart was very, very badly off. And immediately called a priest, was close to us, my closest friend, and 2 other friends that happened to be visiting and were very close to him. And after an hour waiting, we're praying and praying. Finally, we're permitted to come up. And when I came up, I said to the nurse, it was my husband. She said, yes, he lost consciousness. We had to reanimate him. And then I entered the room with a bleeding heart, and I noticed he looked so weak. He had lost his voice, which is typical when the end is closed. And he was just speaking in a whisper. And then he saw the priest and his dear friend surrounding his bed, and he whispered in my ear, ask Father to pray a Te Deum. I want to thank God for all the graces He has given me in my life.
This is at the moment of death, virtually, in articular mortis. And he's asking for the Te Deum, which, if there are viewers who are not familiar with that, it is probably, the greatest hymn of sheer, pure praise and gratitude to God. Some people, there's an old legend that St. Ambrose and St. Augustine wrote it on the occasion of Augustine's conversion, but whatever. Your husband asked for a hymn of sheer gratitude and praise.
At the moment when he was dying,
at his weakest,
he was miserable. Truly all the amazing gifts that he has received seem to be dormant. And you recall that I made a distinction, which I borrowed from my husband, of course, between actual and superactual. Now, in a moment of such weakness and physical misery, that the first thing springing up is gratitude, shows that throughout his life,
The superactual.
it was superactually there. You know, someone whose life has been so brilliant and who ended as a beggar in a slummy apartment in New York City and never complained. Never said, just imagine that so and so and so. Rather, he would say, how grateful must I be that I was born in Florence, that I lived in this magnificent mansion in Munich, instead of saying, what have I come to, as many people did. Now, you know, the human heart is perverted by sin, by original sin. And one of the mentions of original sin, which I believe has never been mentioned, and if it has, it's simply my ignorance that I don't mention it, is ingratitude. Adam and Eve were placed in a paradise, and practically everyone of beauty, love, friendship, whatever it was, they had it all. And they were just prohibited to eat from the fruit of one tree. And there was many trees laden with magnificent fruits. No, they wanted this one tree because they wanted to become God without God. That is the very essence. It was apart from pride, apart from disobedience, apart of stupidity. It was a tremendous sin of ingratitude. Now, ingratitude is an ugly sin, and very few people are aware of it. We live in a society when I hardly ever hear the word thank you. And I claim solemnly that a day in which I have not said thank you to God or to my fellow man is a wasted day.
You know, King Lear said, how sharper than a serpent's tooth is a thankless child.
But I mean, today, the amazing thing is that so many young people, they are so spoiled. They have everything that when you give them a gift, in a high percentage of cases, I never hear the word thank you. Yeah. When I was a child, my dear father, who was basically a very gentle person, but when I had received a gift, he pestered me until I had thanked. He would give me no peace. You have received a gift, you thank. You know, and that was, so to speak, so ingrained in us. And today, you don't hear the word thank you anymore. Now, why are we ungrateful? My husband has written a very long essay, 50, 60 pages essay on gratitude, that was published by the Sophia Institute Press under the title The Art of Living. Unfortunately, it's out of print. And it's one of these treasures and gems, once again, which is lost. I mean, of course, you can find it in library. But what is so beautiful about it is that it pinpoints the dangers in me, preventing me from being grateful. For example, you do me a great favor. You do me a kindness. And I must acknowledge that I'm indebted to you. There are two things in a gift: the goodness of the giver and the benefit to myself. These are two things. And you should not separate them and simply say, well, I'm not indebted to the giver because I don't consider the benefit very great. I would deserve something better than that. But basically it is a response to the goodness of the giver. This should touch your heart, and then you respond with gratitude. Some people do not want to be indebted, because to be indebted is in their minds humiliating. And instead of understanding that the recognition of my indebtedness, Tom, you and Dad know that we are beggars. You know, everything that we have received is from God, and everything, I mean, without God we have nothing, we are just beggars, and therefore to acknowledge it is, number one, a dimension of freedom. It makes me free. Number two, the beauty of rejoicing about the goodness of another person. We thank you, O Lord, for your glory. You know, it is a recognition that He's a giver of all gifts, that He's a master, and so on.
That's a very strange, I've often thought in the Gloria, we give thanks to Thee for Thy great glory. To thank God for His glory.
But you know, His glory is resplendent. You know, so you see it in a sublime sunset. You see it in the magnificent studded sky. You see him in the greatness of the sea. You see it in so many things you see. They sing God's glory. It's a silent praise, but they do. You see, they cannot help but praise because they're inanimate. But we must choose to praise and rejoice in the fact that we do so. Number two, some people don't want to retaliate. Because if you give me a gift, I'm going to say, well, I'll have to repay you. No, some people don't like to do that. And so they prefer to turn down the gift than to say, I have to give it back to you. Because, once again, to accept a gift is to recognize that I'm indebted. And instead of understanding to recognize that I'm in debt is enriching. And I must desire to pay you back. Not because I say, no, you no longer have to give. But because it is a response to value. You deserve that I show you my gratitude because you've been kind towards me. And therefore, not because I say I no longer want the burden of being grateful, but simply because it is a due response. Some people feel somehow that gratitude is never called for because, and this is something I'm almost quoting the father of C.S. Lewis, people always do so, help you, for personal subjective reasons. You can be absolutely certain that if I give you a gift, it is because in my mind I've calculated that now I'm going to dominate you, that now I can use you for my purposes by saying, Tom, I have given you so and so, don't forget. No, I expect you to repay me.
That's a very gloomy view.
Well, it's a very gloomy view. And you recall C.S. Lewis writes in Surprised by Law, this is what my father taught me. People will never do something which is selfless. And he said, I discovered that it was false. Even though it is true in many, many cases, in a majority of cases it is true, but in some cases it is incredibly false. You know, unfortunately, the most dramatic episode of my husband's life, you know, in France, because I see the escape from Vienna was a joke by comparison. I mean, that was truly so dramatic. And he was helped and saved by several individuals. One of them, I believe, his case for canonization is coming up. You know, because actually he risked his life to try to help my husband.
Now I must refer our viewers then, say, tune in to the book, to your biography. The title again is
The Soul of a Lion.
The Soul of a Lion. I was thinking of the heart of a lion.
Well, you know, that was one of his last words before he died.
Really?
You know, he said to me, I used to be a lion. He said so in Italian. And now I'm a helpless little human being. Then he closed his eyes, he said, you know, my soul is still a lion.
Oh, good. Bravo.
That was the day before his death.
Bravo. Well, we have a few minutes left in which we must speak quickly of what your husband had to say, which was, as always, with him very perspicacious and incisive about the Christian attitude towards sin and sinners. And then I'm going to mention two little tidbits that I hope will whet people's appetites to snap up your husband's work. But tell us a bit about his...
You know, it is so strange that he had a sort of prophetic view of certain dangers that were going to develop. And he wrote another remarkable book, out of print, called Situation Ethics. And he wrote it in the early 60s.
I wish the other book called Situation Ethics were out of print.
Well, it was basically a response to that, you see. But I mean, I think that the book is a masterpiece, and unfortunately it's much more needed today than it was when he wrote it. And even though he knew nothing as yet at that moment about the disease which has spread today, that if you condemn an evil deed, let us say abortion, you know, it has happened to me many times, and as soon as I say abortion is evil, and I say so on rooftops without a moment's hesitation, you are judgmental. Who are you to pass judgment upon people? And it is so strange. I mean, in his book called Situation Ethics, at the very end of the book, he has one chapter, and I need 2 hours to speak about it, and unfortunately EWTN is going to say, well, time is up, that's it, in which he speaks what is a Christian attitude towards sinners. Now, I'm just going to give you a couple of remarks, and then hope and beg that one day a publisher will understand this is a book which is badly needed and reprint it. first of all, he makes a distinction between principles and the person's action. For example, you take abortion, you take rape, you take adultery, you take theft, you take lying, and it goes on and on and on and on. They are wrong. There's absolutely nothing good that can be said for adultery or for abortion or for rape or for sexual perversion. They're evil, period. Now comes the question of the person who has fallen into this dreadful faults or sins, whatever it might be. Now, phenomenology teaches you to make distinctions. You know, you recall the distinctions we made between different meanings of feelings, or the distinction we made between value, meaning to say the important in itself, and what is considered to be merely subjective, and so on and so on. My husband says there's a radical difference between people in a position of authority. You're a pope, you're a bishop, you're a teacher, you're an educator, you're a parent. And then obviously there are sheep that are confided to you. And in such a case it's not enough simply to say, well, this is wrong and that's all there is to it. But you truly have to be concerned about the guilt or responsibility of the person who has acted so. And you know, if I'm a confessor, which I'm never going to be because I'm only a woman, but if I'm a confessor and someone comes and confesses that he's committed adultery, I'm not going to say, my dear penitent, it is said in the catechism that adultery is wrong, but of course I'm going to be compassionate towards you and I'm not going to pass judgment upon you. The fact that the man has accused himself means that he recognizes his guilt, and it is my mission as an authority in the church, pope or bishop and so on and so on, to speak clearly. And if I fail to do so, I'm not using the authority that God has given me, which I must necessarily incline myself towards people that have sinned and simply condemn what they have done and then lovingly trying to put them out of their sin. But simply say, well, you know, my dear penitent, all of us are sinners. You know, let's face it, I mean, after all, you certainly didn't have bad intentions in doing it, or it was a moment of weakness or a moment of absent-mindedness, so I'll give you absolution. No, you have to say, you know, the penitent comes to confession to say, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I recognize my guilt. Please give me absolution. If I educate a child, you're a father, you have to educate these two children. And one day they did something that was, let us say, bad act of disobedience. It's not only that you condemn disobedience, but you condemn their disobedience. As father, you're responsible for forming their conscience and so on and so on. Now comes the attitude of the person who has no authority. And I hear that there are rumors that someone has committed adultery. And then my husband is going to say a series of things which I find very, very beautiful. And personally, you know, it's always a thing in my husband's thought. Immediately they can relate to my life. It's not simply something abstract, you know, which I say it's quite interesting, but I see no relationship to my life. Number one, let us beware of confusing appearance and reality. There are cases in which someone seems to be doing something evil, but we have no proof that it is so. And my husband relates in his memoirs that in one particular situation in his life, he had every reason to believe that a young man and a young woman had committed fornication. It looked like it. Everything was speaking against them. And to his joy, now please let me emphasize the word joy, he found out that he was mistaken. Now, in other words, first of all, even appearances can be misleading. Tom, there are two things that we hide. Things that are ugly and things that are intimate. And in both cases, people say very stupidly, if you hide it, then it must be something evil. You hide the things which are most personal, most sublime. I mean, if I receive a mystical grace, I'm not going to go on rooftop and say, hey, you fellow, please listen to me, I have a mystical grace. That's my secret. Not to mention the Blessed Sacrament. Well, of course. You know, therefore I say, number one, not to confuse appearance and reality. Number two, not to trust rumors. Because
Hear,
sometimes,
hear.
well, hearsay, well, I don't want to say anything at all, but, and then all of a sudden, you hear that simply about people in the church today. The big trick today is to say there are rumors that such a priest, and particularly a very particular priest, well, maybe there's certain relationship with one of his priests. Well, I don't want to say anything, of course, but, and you spread the poison, and certainly to discredit a person. Number 3, and this is something which is devilish, that if you discover that actually the person has sinned, you rub your hands and say, didn't I always say so? Oh, I'm so clear-sighted.
It's very gratifying.
Don't cheat me. Other people fall in for it because they're naive, but I immediately smelled that. I knew, didn't I tell you? I was right.
That's very, very self.
Well, it is, no, it's wicked.
Congratulatory.
No, and then comes the question, if I discover that actually someone has sinned, my first response should be a deep sorrow. God has been offended. He has harmed his soul. I don't know if you know the story of a saint. I've forgotten his name, but my husband knew them all. And he overheard that a young man and a young woman were going to sleep together and commit a sin. And he went to them and knelt. And he says, please don't offend God and don't harm your soul. And the young man started to slap him. And he said, slap me as much as you want to, but don't sin. This is love. No, and this is crucial, and I believe it should be underlined 3 times. I found out that someone has fallen, committed adultery, sexual perversion, fornication, theft, lying, and the rest of it. Instead of placing myself in the position of a judge and a verdict or are guilty, I should say to myself, and this is something that I ought to say to myself because I've been so blessed by a sound Catholic education. Had I been in this man's shoes, no religious formation, parents that were betraying their mission as parents and so on and so on, I might have done the very same thing. How many sins have I not committed, Tom, because I haven't been exposed to them, because I haven't been tempted? And therefore my attitude is, the conclusion is, this is evil, this person has offended God, this person has harmed his immortal soul, but I could have done the same thing had I not been sustained by grace. And then you pray for the other person, you don't condemn him, you don't place yourself, I would never do that. The Pharisee, I'm not like this publican. I don't do so and so and so and so. This is anti-Christian. The Christian spirit is to be wounded by sadness because God has been offended and because this person whom you love as a brother in Christ has threatened his eternal welfare. And
how often in public life do we see people protesting some evil which is 10,000 miles away, and it always seems to me that the implication there, or often, is an enormously self-congratulatory one. We would never do that. Some outrage which has occurred in the 1940s or whatever. Well, never again. We would never be guilty of that. I always want to say, you better think again. You're made of the same flesh that the rest of the people. Now, we need to find a way in 60 seconds, Lily.
My goodness.
What shall we say? How shall we bring this?
No, I simply say it is so typical in the world in which we live. Don't be judgmental. But then you hear a Mr. Conwell writing a book about Pius XII, condemning him, when there are cases in which you find yourself facing tragic alternatives, and in both cases it can have bad consequences. In such a case, you do not judge because you do not know the motivation of the person doing it. And all of a sudden, in our society, when we cannot judge and say rapism is bad, all of a sudden this holy man is condemned and judged upon as being simply Hitler's Pope. And he was the very one who had written years before, Mit brennende Sorge. Well, we have reached the conclusion of our series of conversations on the work of a man whom I feel is at the very, very top of the
Catholic writers and thinkers and saintly men of the 20th century. I think Pius XII said something about your husband.
He said he was a modern doctor of the church.
A modern doctor of the church. Pius XII was not given to saying things in an offhand way. And I think, I hope that our conversations here will have whetted the appetite of people to snap up all that is available of your husband's work and to pray for the increase.
You have to mention his defense of orthodoxy after Vatican II.
Yes, a marvelous book called The Trojan Horse in the City of God, in which after Vatican II he saw the direction that some things could take, and it's a prophetic book.
The Trojan Horse means the betrayal of the supernatural, and the book will be reprinted by Sophia Institute Press next month.
Back in print,
so
we can get it. Good. Well, I commend to you also the forthcoming biography of Dietrich von Hildebrand by his wife, Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, in which you will find something which we haven't touched on yet, the escape from France and many other rich things. Well, thank you so much, Dr. von Hildebrand. We are all in your debt for sharing all of this with us, and thank you all for joining us in these conversations about A Night for Truth.